All right, we are going to briefly discuss what happens when you raise a number to a negative exponent. So um, to do that, I'd like to start just by looking at what we do with a regular exponent. So let's look at 2 to the third, for example. So when I say I want 2 to the third, what that means is I'm taking 2 and multiplying it by itself 3 times, right? So 2 times 2 times 2, or 8. Okay, but the key being that exponent, the 3, tells us how many times we're going to multiply 2 by itself. So if I did 8 to the fourth, then it's 8 times 8 times 8 times 8. That exponent is telling me that I'm multiplying 8 by itself 4 times, right? But I think most of us are generally okay with that. But when we start to see negatives and fractions, we get a little freaked out. And the truth is, there's really only 1 or 2 rules that you need to keep in mind, and then it operates exactly like a traditional exponent does. So let's first look at maybe the simplest we can go, 2 to the negative 1. Okay. Now, when I'm raising something to the negative 1, it what happens is it moves that 2 to the denominator. So anything that's in the numerator goes to the denominator, and the denominator goes to the numerator. They basically just flip positions. So 2 to the negative 1 is just equal to 1 over 2 to the first. So what happens is the 2 goes to the bottom, and the exponent becomes positive. Alternatively, if I had 1/2 to the raised to the negative 1 power, then the negative 2, or sorry, the 2 goes to the numerator, and the power becomes positive, and so it would be 2 to the first over 1. So anything that's in the numerator goes to the bottom, bottom goes to the top. Let's see if I can. I'm going to write a somewhat generic formula, and hopefully you guys are okay with that. But if I raise x over y to the negative z power, then that's equal to y to the z over x to the z. So if you're looking strictly at the numerical value of the exponent, so you don't think about the negative at all, right? So in this case, z, that's just some real positive number, right? And then x and y are also just real numbers, positive or negative, doesn't really matter. But when we raise them, that fraction, x over y to the negative power, x goes to the denominator and is raised to the z power, and y goes to the numerator and is raised to the z power. And that negative from the exponent just goes away, right? So let's look at 5/6 squared. I guess to the negative 2, because we're negative 2. So what happens? Well, 6 goes to the numerator, 5 goes to the denominator, and our z in this instance would be 2, so we'd have 6 squared over 5 squared. Okay, and so if I simplify that, 6 squared is 36, 5 squared is 25, and so that would be our solution. Hopefully that's okay. Let's look at one more just for just to be thorough. So if I took 1 over 8 to the negative 7th, then 1 goes to the denominator. 1 to the 7th is always just going to be 1, right? But we'll write it. And then 8 goes to the numerator, also raised to the 7th. So the 1 on the denominator doesn't really do anything. Our solution would just be 8 to the 7th. I don't have a calculator by me at the moment, but some big number, right? So all that happened was the 8 came to the top, the 1 went to the bottom, and our exponent became a positive. So it flips, and that allows our exponent to become positive. What this leads us to is maybe a little bit of a question on how do I deal with raising a fraction to a power. And truly, that shouldn't be a whole lot more complicated in and of itself. So let's look at, I keep going back to 1/2 because it's easy to work with. So let's say I want to take 1/2 and raise it to the 5th power. Right? Now, what this says to me, so there's no negatives there for the moment. What this says to me is I'm raising the numerator to the 5th power and the denominator to the 5th power. So the numerator to the 5th is obviously just going to be 1, and 2 to the 5th is 32. And so we've simplified. Alternatively, another way to look at that would just be to say, well, if 2 to the 3rd is 2 times 2 times 2, then 1/2 to the 5th would just be 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. And so, 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4 times 1/2 is 1/8 times 1/2 is 1/16 times 1/2 gives us our 1/32 there. Right, so if we wanted to go back and look at our 1/8 to the -7th, what I would do in my head, I say, okay, I'm going to flip the numerator and the denominator, which allows my exponent to become positive, and then it's 8 to the 7th, which we know, right? It's 8 times 8 times 8 times 8 times 8 times 8 times 8. Okay. Look at one more. Just yeah. Let's do 3/5 to the -3rd. Right? So step 1, I flip my numerator and denominator. My exponent becomes positive. And then 5/3, 2 ways to think about it. It's either 5 to the 3rd over 3 to the 3rd, or it's also 5 over 3 times 5 over 3 times 5 over 3, and 5 cubed is 125, 3 cubed is 27, so that there would be our solution. If you need additional help or have additional questions, as always, just reach out to me through my email.